Today, we're diving into literally one of the most famous and foundational stories ever written, Genesis chapter 3. Looking specifically at the King James text, we're going to stick strictly to the words on the page to really unpack the incredible sequence of events that unfolds here. I mean, picture it, a pristine, flawless garden. It's this lush, storybook paradise where humanity's earliest moments are spent in perfect, warm harmony. The imagery the text builds for us is absolutely stunning. But, as you probably know, this peaceful setting is really just the backdrop for a gripping, dramatic turning point. Our goal today is to map out exactly how that turn happens, step by step.
Okay, let's dive into this, because answering that question introduces us to our first and honestly perhaps most fascinating character. Right as the narrative opens, a new presence enters this gorgeous garden. Now, the text doesn't introduce some terrifying, massive monster. It introduces an animal, a beast of the field, but one that is described in a very unique way. And understanding exactly what kind of creature this is, well, that's the key to unlocking how this whole domino effect gets started. The text explicitly introduces the serpent using a very specific, carefully chosen word, subtle. Now, in the context of this writing, subtle means crafty, cunning, or sly. The serpent is described as being more subtle than any other beast of the field the Lord God had made, and this detail is absolutely crucial. The deception in this garden doesn't start with a roar or a threat or some big display of power. Instead, it begins with an incredibly calculated approach. It starts with a simple, almost innocent-sounding, whispered question. Here we see the serpent totally testing the waters. He approaches the woman and asks this specific question. Notice the strategy here, right? He doesn't just directly challenge a command right out of the gate. Instead, he asks the woman to clarify the rules of the garden. Yea, hath God said. It's a really clever way of opening up a dialogue, of getting her to articulate the boundaries herself. It's this masterful use of language, just planting the tiniest seed of doubt by questioning the exact parameters of what is and isn't allowed. So the woman answers him, and her response establishes the ultimate stakes of our story. She clarifies that, yes, they can eat the fruit of the trees in the garden, but with one monumental exception, the tree right in the middle of the garden. The rule she recites is crystal clear, and it is incredibly stark. They aren't to eat of it, and they aren't even allowed to touch it. And the consequence? Lest ye die. The boundaries are firmly drawn. Eat or touch the fruit, and you lose your life. Now, what's really interesting about this is how quickly the serpent pivots from just being a questioning observer to a direct challenger. Once the rule and that ultimate consequence of death is out there, the serpent boldly contradicts it. Ye shall not surely die. But he doesn't stop there. He offers this incredibly tempting alternative motive for the rule. He claims that eating the fruit won't kill them, but rather it'll wake them up. He promises that their eyes shall be opened and that they'll actually become as gods, knowing good and evil. He completely reframes the forbidden tree. It's not a deadly trap anymore. It's a withheld treasure. Armed with this new, totally tantalizing perspective, the woman looks at the tree again, and the text lays out this very specific three-step evaluation she makes in her mind. It's almost like a picture book of temptation. First, she sees that the tree is good for food, so it appeals to the physical appetite. Second, it's pleasant to the eyes, meaning it's visually beautiful and desirable. Third, and probably most crucially given what the serpent just promised, it's a tree to be desired to make one wise. It appeals to the intellect, the ego, that desire to be elevated. On literally every level, the fruit is practically irresistible. And right here is where the narrative just hits the gas. Look at the rapid, domino effect sequence of verbs used to describe this fateful choice. She saw, she took, she ate, she gave it to her husband who was with her, and he ate. It happens in such quick succession. After all that build-up, the conversation, the internal evaluation, the actual physical act of breaking this monumental rule is remarkably brief. But in that rapid-fire sequence of actions, their entire reality is irrevocably changed forever. Instantly, the serpent's promise comes true. Well, partially true, but with a deeply bitter twist of irony. Their eyes are opened, exactly as he said. But instead of feeling like glorious gods, the very first thing they realize is a stark, incredibly uncomfortable truth. They knew they were naked. The text paints this really vivid picture of sudden vulnerability and shame. Their gut reaction is this frantic, makeshift attempt to cover themselves up. They sew fig leaves together to make aprons. The pure innocence of that pristine garden is completely gone, replaced by self-consciousness and a desperate need to hide. Let's just pause here for a second because the tone of the text shifts dramatically. We go from the rapid pace of the transgression to this heavy, suspenseful calm. They hear the voice of the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day. Just imagine the cinematic tension of that moment. Before, this presence was likely a source of deep comfort. But now it brings absolute terror. Adam and his wife, standing there in their hastily made fig leaf aprons, do the only thing their newfound shame lets them do. They hide themselves amongst the trees. Then comes this haunting, incredibly simple question echoing softly through the trees. The Lord God calls unto Adam and says, "Where art thou?" It's such a fascinating narrative moment. It's not a thunderclap of judgment or an immediate accusation. It's a question of location. It highlights the broken relationship and the literal, physical distance Adam has suddenly put between himself and his Creator. And this simple, forward question, it forces Adam to finally step out of the shadows.
Adam steps forward and gives his answer. And his confession is deeply revealing about his new state of existence. He says, "I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." Notice what he focuses on here. He doesn't immediately say, "I ate the fruit." He confesses to the symptoms of what he did, the fear and the undeniable awareness of his nakedness. Fear has officially entered the human experience, and it's directly tied to their vulnerability.
The confrontation now hits its absolute climax. The Lord God connects the dots of Adam's fear and nakedness, asking, "Who told thee that thou wast naked?" And then comes the direct, piercing inquiry, "Hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee that thou shouldest not eat?" The ultimate rule of the garden is brought right back to the forefront. There's literally nowhere left to hide. They are being asked point blank if they broke the one rule they were given. And this brilliantly illustrates a deeply recognizable human instinct. What happens when we get caught? Notice how they both react. Adam entirely refuses to take direct responsibility. He says, "The woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree." He passes the blame to Eve, and honestly, in the same breath, subtly blames God for giving her to him in the first place. Then God questions the woman, and she pulls the exact same tactic. She says, "The serpent beguiled me, and I did eat." The blame is just perfectly passed right down the line.
Before we get to the consequences, let's look at the specific word Eve uses to defend herself: beguiled. She states, "The serpent beguiled me." To be beguiled means to be deceived or charmed into doing something, and this links perfectly back to that earlier definition of the serpent as subtle. Eve acknowledges the cunning nature of the trap. She was charmed by the promises of wisdom. But despite the deception, the act was still committed, and that sets the stage for the inevitable judgments that follow.
The narrative now moves into this highly structured, authoritative sequence where the consequences are handed down. Let's walk through these, because these world-altering curses shape the entire new reality of the text. First, the serpent is cursed to go upon its belly and eat dust, with eternal enmity declared between its seed and the woman's seed. Second, the woman is told her sorrow and conception will be greatly multiplied and that her husband shall rule over her. Finally, for Adam, the very ground itself is cursed. He'll have to eat of it in sorrow, the earth will bring forth thorns and thistles, and he will have to sweat just to get bread. Culminating the judgment upon Adam is this iconic, profoundly sobering quote, "For dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return." That original warning, lest you die, is now fully realized as a permanent condition. The harsh new reality of human mortality is established right here. They are reminded of their origin from the dirt and told that ultimately that is exactly where they're going to end up. It is a striking summary of the fragility that has just crashed into their existence. Yet right in the middle of these heavy, world-altering curses, the text gives us this brief, really poignant moment of care. Adam calls his wife's name Eve, noting that she is the mother of all living. It's this spark of continuation and life right after a massive pronouncement of death. And immediately following this, the Lord God makes coats of skins to clothe them. Those fragile, insufficient fig leaves they frantically sewed together, God replaces them with durable garments. It's a powerful image of provision, even in the midst of profound judgment. So, the crucial point here is understanding what happens next and why. The Lord God speaks again, saying, "Behold, the man is become as one of us to know good and evil." The serpent was actually right about their eyes being open to this specific knowledge. But because of this new state, an urgent preventative measure has to be taken, lest he put forth his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. The logic of the text is clear. Humanity simply cannot be allowed to live forever in this fallen, cursed state. Because they can't be allowed anywhere near the tree of life, the ultimate consequence drops. The text says, "Therefore the Lord God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden." It is a sorrowful departure. Humanity is officially banished.
driven out of the lush, perfectly provided for storybook paradise and sent out into the harsh, cursed world. Adam's new purpose is explicitly stated. He's sent out to till the ground from whence he was taken. This perfectly fulfills that earlier judgment of having to sweat and toil in the cursed dirt just to survive. And the chapter closes out with a final, absolutely stunning visual. To ensure there is no return, God places cherubims at the east of the Garden of Eden, along with a flaming sword which turned every way. Just picture the cinematic intensity of that imagery, a shimmering, spinning blade of fire and angelic guards standing right at the threshold. They are stationed there specifically to keep the way of the tree of life. The gates of paradise are violently and spectacularly sealed forever. We've seen exactly how the words on the page construct this incredible narrative, from a cunning whisper all the way to a flaming sword, and it leaves us with a profound question to ponder. Having gained the knowledge of good and evil, was the devastating loss of paradise the ultimate, unavoidable price of human awareness? Genesis 3 sets up this massive dilemma of innocence versus knowledge that literally continues to echo through history. Take a moment to think about the immense legacy of the sequence we just mapped out. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.